Hello and welcome to another MatChat podcast with me, Mina, where I invite guests to sit on a yoga mat with me, as it were, and share thoughts on all things well-being. My intention is to leave you feeling uplifted and empowered. If you want to know more about my yoga teaching in my book, then please visit my website, minablair.com. Today I've invited Dr. Alison Kay onto the mat. She is an award-winning author and founder of the Vibrational Upgrade System. She also teaches yoga, meditation, and energy medicine, focusing on the chakra system. So welcome onto my virtual mat, Dr. Alison. I'm so excited to have you here today.
I'm so happy and excited to see where we go, considering what we just chatted about. Y'all hang tight.
Yes. Yeah, this is what happens when two yoga teachers get together and talk about stuff. Yes. So I am really pleased to have you because you've been in this field of yoga and well-being now for a long time, for over 25 years, Dr. Alison. So let's just start with how you even arrived there. What was it that attracted you, or how you found this whole area of well-being, and maybe even the mat just specifically?
Cool. Okay. So my mom, like when my teen years, suggested I look into the field of psychology. Her saying, Alison, you seem to have a really natural feel for people and understanding them. And I felt it out within my own self and decided to go in as that major. And 3 semesters in, let me back up. So first semester as an elective, I believe I took personal training. The second semester, which I am now I've been certified for a long time. And then second semester, I took yoga. Am certified from India for that. So my university had a Buddhist pagoda hidden in the mountains. And I didn't even know that when I went first to look at it. And I feel it out and see if it was the place for me. The first book on mindfulness, too, was written by a professor at my undergraduate university. So there was a certain vibe there. My first shop I went into that had stuff from India was there on the high street, so to speak, or the main street of where I was in Amherst. It's called Happy Valley in the Berkshire Mountains of Western Mass. So there was a vibe there is what I'm getting at. So 3 semesters in my bachelor's major of psychology, I was horrified, basically, and left it because I said, you aren't teaching me how to be the happiest, most thriving version of myself, nor are you showing me how to help others do that. They were focused on the hardwiring of the brain. They were focused on proving themselves as a science at the time. They were focused on capitalistic and industrial applications of the field of psychology as if to prove themselves worthy of being a science and useful in the Western capitalistic model. So ever since then, I've been looking at the holistic model. How do we be the happiest, most thriving versions of ourselves?
Gosh, okay. So you came in on an academic thing and then it just didn't speak to you. You just, it felt all wrong. That's so interesting. And so you just left it? I mean, 3 semesters, that's a year.
I didn't leave college. I switched majors and then graduated with a different major, ultimately in English literature, studying. So the second major was about advertising and marketing, and I learned how we get divided up as sectors in our society and labeled by the firms, like dish soap for women at home watching soap operas during the day, those assumptions and how that carves us up and impacts us subconsciously and unconsciously. And then I switched to social thought, political economy, where I was being taught by a guy who marched with Martin Luther King, for example, in the marches. And so then I went to English literature with creative writing as a focus, as like an art form to study psychology, sociology, and kind of why our minds are conditioned the way they are in an art form. So I ended up with a bachelor's in English lit.
Gosh. Okay. Wow. Okay. And then when you left university, what did you do with that then?
Okay. Let's make this story that's long shorter. So I moved out west to San Francisco to go for my master's in creative writing. And as I was waiting tables, waiting to hear about getting in, I got a synchronistic opportunity to help get people elected to both the California state and the federal legislature who are going to write policies and bills that would save the environment. It was very strategic. Instead of just electing people who cared about the environment, it was actually people who would write legislation to save it. So a woman, I helped get the first Latina woman elected to California State Assembly. And once she was in, she actually wrote a bill that saved the last piece of green space in LA Basin. I was really successful and moved up really quickly because I was so passionate about it. And because of that success, I was put in more and more stressful campaigns and situations, in more and more important key races. And so I was walking through a bookstore in San Francisco and a book jumped off the shelf at me as I was kind of asking my guidance or my team, like, okay, I need to manage the stress. How can I do that? And it was a book on meditation. So I learned to meditate. And this is separate from the yoga practice back, started as in my bachelor's. So I fast forward, the campaign season completes, and I then go backpack overseas, including all throughout this is my first time in England, and I love Wordsworth. So I wanted to get up to the Lake District, which I did, as well as London. But then I lived on a Greek island for a month. I lived in Israel for a month. And then I came back to the States and got my master's in public administration, focused on environmental policy. As I was graduating, I got my first energy medicine modality taught to me, but I was also teaching meditation to, not yoga at this point, meditation to adults in a local community center. So I graduate 6 months, 3 months, I don't know, goes by. I'm going for jobs, asking where can I affect more change inside the system or like with an NGO or nonprofit outside. And no doors were opening. You know that feeling?
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, what are you trying to show me here? Why are there no doors opening? And what I got was, Allison, if you want to affect change, it's not ready yet. The market's still totally invested in fossil fuels, one conscious at a time. Do it that way. So I took my bachelor's and went into the classroom teaching as my profession. And then my side hustle became the energy medicine, holistic health and wellness, spiritual path sessions. So now I'm teaching like with a male colleague of mine to kids. This just as ADD was becoming a diagnosis, even though they had the diagnosis after they had the medication for it. So we formed a club, and I taught the kids Qigong because I also got formally certified later in Qigong. But at that point, I taught them meditation, Qigong, and some yogic stuff. And it was brilliant to watch these kids like see me move, cause like a breeze to happen in the trees and the shrubs, and then teach them how to do it. And because they were taken out of their thoughts, and they were able to see that they were more than just their thoughts. I'll never forget it. So fast forward though, 2.5 years, and on a Saturday, I'm sitting there with my hands over a woman's abdomen, and in an energy medicine session, and she's like in number 3 or 4 of a package of 10. We're both really pleased with the results, and I'm like, okay, how can I get even better results for my clients? Same time, maybe the same Saturday, I looked at my checkbook, wasn't happy with how much I was struggling as a person with a master's degree, with only basic needs. I did want organic produce, and I did want a massage per week because I consider those preventative health like 301. And I also knew there was a sense of adventure I wasn't having. And I also sensed that my society expected me to be okay with being in this cage for 3 decades of my life. And I wasn't okay with that either. So I knew there was a sense of abundance that was missing, and a sense of ease, and a sense of fun, and a sense of adventure. So within a month's time, another synchronicity colleague comes in and turns me on to the international school system, do what I had to do, and went to where I had to go to. All these international heads from all over the world came in, did a bunch of interviews, had a bunch of job offers, chose Taiwan, went there, taught at an international school for a decade, eventually was teaching something called global psychology that I created as a course, East and West, still teaching meditation now to sophomores and juniors, particularly juniors in the process of college applications because they were going back to the States, to Ivy Leagues. And then having the side hustle, teaching doing the energy medicine sessions and holistic health and wellness with fellow expats or local Chinese. And then came back to the States after 10 years, dropped that profession and took my side hustle full time, and have been doing it And by the way, that included going to India and getting certified as a yoga teacher during one Chinese New Year break, an intensive, my last year. And the guy who owned, it's the founder of the school is Indian, but he was married to an Irish woman. And so he was very used to Westerners, and it was really super fun. And they brought in like a Brahmin philosopher to teach us the philosophy of yoga. And then they brought in an Ayurvedic doctor to teach us the Ayurvedic components, and a Westerner to teach us the anatomy. And then he just taught us it was Ashtanga yoga. So yeah, it was brilliant. I did a lot of traveling during that time in my breaks. And then while I was working in Taiwan, got traditional treatments, asked questions, went to monasteries, asked questions of monks. It just kept building my understanding of how consciousness and energy interact and how it's a science and has been for like 5,000 years, and how much we know nothing about it in the West comparatively. Yeah. And so I came back with the understanding, just this last bit of, man, if we knew more about this science, that energy and subtle energy and consciousness is, we'd have so much more thriving and so much less suffering in the West. So there I was answering that question of what made me reject psychology. I had found the answer to.
Yeah, you see, I am fascinated by this whole thing of what it is about the West that has the resistance. Maybe that's not the right word, but there is something about it. So we've got all this ancient wisdom that's been kicking around for thousands of years. And yet here in the West, from what I've read and and my experience of things, is that we need somehow to have the scientific kind of tick or evidence or data or something, so that then becomes real, whatever the thing is that we don't think is real. We need to have it given to us in a certain evidential way before we'll trust it.
Indeed.
And I am just fascinated by that, because I've read the books by Dr. Joe Dispenza, who cottoned onto this very early on in his career. So he was a chiropractor and came to the whole energy field through having a terrible accident and healing himself. It was all really interesting. But because he immediately also then encountered this kind of, oh, energy, all this is a bit woo-hoo, and wasn't taken seriously, he then made it his life's mission, or one of his life's mission, to link the science with the energy, and did loads of actual, real, scientifically based experiments, measuring the vibrations of the chakras and all manner of other things, so that in a way that would overcome our resistance here in the West, and that we'd then start looking at this more seriously. But that sounds such like a hard work, doesn't it? I mean, why don't we just kind of roll with it and say, yeah, that makes sense?
Mina, I love what you just did, because I'll tell you what, a lot of people, Joe Dispenza is a colleague of mine. I believe he has a testimonial on the back of one of my books. I get a lot of people who work with me after getting turned on by Joe Dispenza. They then come in to work with me. It's a very, but my whole first book, let's go right into it. It started as my dissertation when I still lived in Taiwan. I was writing it in the traditional tea house after work, after the gym. It's called What If There's Nothing Wrong? And I expected it to just be my dissertation as a holistic life coach. And so what I got guided to was to explore the very question you're asking. So I got taken back to when the church and science, so we're coming out of the medieval times. This feels like post-Henry VIII. It's more the Enlightenment, when it's like life got divided up between science taking care of measuring what was talked about in the Bible as it was first construed, as the Royal Society of Science began. And then the church took care of everything supernatural. So all the stuff that the alchemists knew, for example, became buried and into the secret societies. And there was more of a sense of superstition with this stuff. I feel like there's a load of superstition within the Chinese culture. Don't get me wrong there, but there was like some superstitiousness around like being able to turn like iron or bronze into something else, and it having been considered magic at the time, when in fact it was chemistry. So there was a lot attributed to magic that was also paralleled with all of, I think, the fairy stuff, the witch stuff. in the UK and Ireland that was ley lines. And originally in Chinese culture, they're called dragon lines. And so a lot of the houses in Chinese culture, you'll see the ceilings, the roof slanted so that the dragon lines or the ley lines or the feng shui can travel effectively. And you know how in Ireland, they're called fairy lines. Or fairy paths, and certain houses and windows and doors will be built in such a way so that they don't block the fairy lines, so that the energy can flow. But there just seems to be this extra level of superstitiousness that somehow tied in with fear, and then the church reinforcing that didn't allow for the focus on consciousness because of the authoritative aspects of how society divided into the patriarchal sciences and the patriarchal church. Anything that was wild or untamable or intuitive or invisible was bad and needed to be afraid. We needed to be afraid of. And then the church controlled that part so that they could have power. We didn't have that in the East. And it's interesting to me because I know I had to approach it logically. I have a really, my upbringing is like watching Star Trek with my older brother, for God's sakes. I'm super intellectual. And I think that that's something I've gotten feedback from throughout the years. People like working with me because I take that, I like Joe Dispenza, I translate that bridge from my understanding of ancient wisdom and then my understanding of the sciences. So the ancient wisdom is about 5,000 years old, at least, that we can track in the yogic wisdom and in the traditional Chinese wisdom. So yin yang being behind, that's Taoist. So that's being behind acupuncture. And in that culture, they understand that where qi goes, blood follows. That's a traditional Chinese medical statement, right? So if qi is like ki is in Reiki or prana is in yoga, vital life force energy, vital life force energy is almost redundant, really, but that's how it's translated into English. So they have one syllable word, qi, in the Chinese culture for it. And they say, where vital life force energy goes, blood follows. So this is saying where vital life force energy goes, the physical follows. Quantum physics finally got on board with that just recently. Now, from my training in understanding yoga and meditation to the depth that I do, and with my psychology background, because I ended up teaching later, so I have a really good blend of both Western and Eastern, I add in where consciousness goes, energy follows, and then the physical fills in. So yoga in the Hindu culture, I feel, is able to get to more subtle understandings of subtle energy more than the Chinese. The Chinese are really good. They're still a little bit more crude on that scale that the Tibetans have of subtle energy, the most subtle, all the way over to physical energy, the most crude or gross, not because it's bad or yucky, but because it's unwieldy. It's very, very, very physical. So on that spectrum, I feel like the traditional Chinese understanding in its medical tomes, for example, all the way to Qigong, it's still a bit more crude. We're focused still on the liver and on the kidney as these organs that are primary for foundational functions in keeping us vital and flourishing. Whereas over in the yogic culture, the understanding of they have metal in the 5 elements, and they have 5 elements in Chinese culture. And in the yogic culture, there's 5 elements, but instead of metal, there's ether. So that's more subtle energy, ether, the etheric. And that's, as you go up the chakra column, the first chakra to be etheric, of that more esoteric, more subtle energy, is the throat chakra, right? And so I feel like, why is there this resistance? I've already spoken to that, but I feel like part of it is intertwined with resistance to the feminine and the suppression of the feminine. If you look at hysteria, born from that was the first vibrator for women. But who was labeling and diagnosing that was men, saying, okay, so when women rise up and they get unplacked, like they're not able to be easily tamed, we're going to call that a disorder, because that's bad. Because and meanwhile, women are having their intuition, they're having their raw fierceness emerge. and wanting to use their voice, and the males were like, no, sorry, don't want to hear it, you're hysterical. So one doctor got smart enough to like basically, get women off, and so he's like, okay, this calms them down, and then develop the vibrator. Right. So, I mean, we are magical women, and so are men. I'm not at all trying to say anything disrespectful to men, but our wiring inherently to intuition and the access to creation and the more the creative energy, we're wired for it. And I needed to get suppressed because it really induced a lot of fear. And the patriarchy is they wanted to create order in our society, rational, logical order. And so I feel like there's this unconscious in the collective, particularly in the West, fear that if we don't have everything orderly, rational, concrete, sequential, then, oh my God, we're going to have the dark ages of the medieval times all over again. And we'll have witch trials and everything will go chaotic. It's like this either or thing. And I was listening to one guy talk about this he was English, and he was saying, I feel like we've now become overly rationalistic. And I loved hearing that from a man. In fact, I love the males in the UK. I don't mean to sound like I love every single man in the UK, but comparatively to American men, they're more open. It might surprise you. They're more open to, yeah, she's nodding. They're more open to the mystical and the subtle energies and the magical, in part because of that history I just went through. Here where the men, it's even more like you have to have it orderly, you have to have it predictable, you have to have it concrete, sequential, it has to be controlled. The allowance for the wild is even less here in the States than in what I've experienced in the UK. I go to the UK twice a year and lead retreats. My students come over there and get certified in vibrational upgrade system that I created, which is half mindfulness in my yogic background and half my energy medicine background. So I'm there for 2 months, twice a year. So I'm there for about a third of the year in the Southwest. Did a lot of touring around there. So I go to these sacred sites. I talk to locals about the fairy lines. Like this is all researched. It's not just like me reading books.
Well, I find all of that super fascinating. And I think you're right. I think because once upon a time, the male and the feminine in most of the global cultures were accepted as two equal parts to create a really important whole. I'm going back now to quite ancient cultures where we had the high priestess, we had, I know the women in the Viking culture. I'm Norwegian, so I know a little bit about it. They were absolutely equal partners, had a seat at the table, were seen as critical to the survival of the community, the culture, to the race, everything, and
Yes.
yet I think you're right. Because I've spoken to other people on my podcast, and this does seem to keep coming up, this rise of the patriarchy, which has then suppressed the feminine power. And it comes from a place of fear. And I'm wondering, in your book, The Vibrational Upgrade, at the beginning, you say that we live in a really magical time. Are you meaning there that it's magical now? Because it's feeling to me, and I don't know what you think, that the feminist, I don't want to say feminism because that takes us into another place. I'm talking about the feminine, as in the feminine power, the feminine side, the moon, the feminine energy. I feel like that's now on the rise. I feel like that is now kind of re-entering again, and we're all trying to work out how it now fits. Yeah. But is that what you mean by we're living in a magical time now?
Not just that, but that's such a great question. So I also want to add in the Celtic culture, women could own land, right? And both of those are from close to, if not of the UK, right? Mm-hmm. Now in America, there are matrilineal native tribes where the women could be chiefs and they were respected as well. I think we did a better job wiping out the native voice in the States than what occurred over there. I mean, there's Latina, Central and South America too, that are matriarchal. Like whenever I go to Mexico, I go, all right, so here we go. So I was back for about a year and a half from the decade in Asia and working the business, giving interviews. Nothing about Voice America reached out to me and asked me to give a weekly radio show on the Mayan galactic alignment of December 21st, 2012. And I didn't understand why. I wasn't doing anything public facing with the Mayans or the Mayan, but I was taking people because I live on the west coast of Florida. So I'm a hop, skip, and a jump across the Gulf of Mexico down to the Yucatan, where Chichen Itza, one of the main Mayan ruins, where the calendar was formed that made them predict December 21st, 2012 was. So I was taking clients on VIP private retreats to there, but that wasn't public facing. You had to be kind of like in the know and working with me. So I thought it very interesting that they reached out to me to ask me to do this radio show when I was doing nothing about it. So I said, give me 48 hours. Let me listen to my intuition. I'll let you know. I did it. I interviewed a bunch of experts. And what I found out was from 2012 to 2032, we are in a 20-year window. And from, and the Mayans weren't the only ones that saw it was the end of a 26,000 year era. In the yogic culture, Yogi Bhajan talked about the end of one yuga and the beginning of another yuga, yuga meaning era. And then the professional astrologers talk about the end of the Piscean age and going into the beginning of the Aquarian age. That's just 3 examples. There were many more voices that identified 2012 in the Mayan specific to December 21st. It's the end of one era and the beginning of a new one. So in this 20-year window, 2012 to 2022 was the first half. Now you'll notice that COVID was at the tail end of that. What was happening was a ton of massive amounts of clearing and purging where there's been abuses of power, where there's been lies, where there's been secrecy, where there's been imbalances. And that's whether it's spiritual and material, where we might be too materialistic and not spiritual enough within each of us and collectively. It's also the masculine and the feminine within each of us where we've been out of balance, as well as collectively. And the awakening aspects, like, there's so many more yoga studios and meditation studios. Even before COVID started, there were more crystal stores, there's more metaphysical centers. And so the sensitivity to the skin, needing a new laundry detergent for sensitive skin getting produced, the antibacterial soap, all of this is a sign of awakening, more sensitive, more awakening. People are now understanding more what they take into their bodies via their foods. We need to have that more purified. The earth has been clearing too, so we need to get, the soil cleaned up instead of like the mass agriculture and what it's been putting into the soil and taking from the soil. So everything is coming back into balance, but it had to get cleared first. That's why it seems so chaotic and hard to navigate, or challenging and unfamiliar to navigate. But now we're in the second half, which is about stepping into more of our co-creative power, because we are creating the new era, and it's meant to be a golden era. I know this might sound really ivory tower or Pollyanna, but it is meant to be. If you look at a fever breaking, before it breaks, it has to peak. So if you take a mountaintop perspective or a satellite perspective and you look at the divisiveness, for example, in American politics, that's the fever peaking before it breaks into more unity. Believe it or not, this is a higher universal law, right? And so the times we're moving into is where we are each recognizing more that which quantum physics is finally recognized, which is what traditional Chinese medicine has been saying for 5,000 years. What happens externally is created from what's happening internally. And so in the yogic culture, I find that they're saying, okay, so every human mind is neurotic. Here are the tools with which to work with your own particular flavor. So working with your consciousness and finding out, that excavation done to what I call the back of the house consciousness, where we're creating our lives. The stats are 85% of our daily choices create our lives. Coming from 85% of it, our subconscious and unconscious. I think from the tens of thousands of people I've worked with at this point and observed and talked with, I think that in myself, first and foremost, it's more like 95% of our daily choices are basically made from the parts of our consciousness whose thoughts we don't hear, whose thoughts we don't observe in meditation. It's the back of the house consciousness at the unconscious, meaning not conscious, and subconscious level, meaning under the conscious mind. So for example, when we have trauma approaching us, our ego mind, which is what meditation is called, calls the part of the mind, because it's attached to the identity side of our identity level of ourselves. Our ego mind is given to us to navigate the physical plane. And if there's something coming in towards our lives, it goes into fight or flight. Do I have to protect and defend, or do I have to go into flight to escape? So when it's approaching the new, our ego mind naturally resists it. So it goes into classifying everything on the physical plane that our five senses picks up so that we can navigate it. But we don't necessarily hear that classification happening. So when we learn to drive, we say, put the car in gas, put the foot on brake, put the foot on gas, put the car in drive or reverse. But we don't say it now that we know how to drive. It's lodged into our subconscious. So what bottom line is 95% of what is creating our daily lives are from thoughts we don't even hear. We get conditioned, we get imprints, we have karma, we have unconscious biases. There's all this stuff back there in our karma that I am so busy clearing so that we can then have more of the consciousness that's been not accessible, that's been blocked and locked in the back of the house consciousness, and then correspondingly to the relevant chakra in that part of the body it's also blocked, cleared, and then loosened, and then brought them naturally to the front of the house consciousness. So we have more consciousness with which to make more mindful choices as we create our new era. And in that, I've noticed there's a hell of a lot more support coming in the last couple of years than I have ever perceived before. New support in the metaphysical, new prayers that get answered easier. The Tao, the field of the Tao, I've nicknamed the field of unlimited possibilities. Stuff that wasn't possible last year is now becoming possible because we're meant to be creating beyond what we've gotten to already, individually and collectively. That's why I call it magical times we're in.
Yeah, I think there is a shift afoot for sure. And I think things like COVID and certainly the invasion of the Ukraine here in Europe, I look at that when that happened. Do you know what? My first reaction to that was, really? Are we going back there to,
much the same.
I am sitting here in England watching tanks rolling. It was like some kind of, wait a second, that's not
World War II.
That's not 1940. This is like today.
And I did the same thing.
Right. And I asked my daughter, who is she's just turned 31. We experienced this together because we were on a trip home to Norway. We were doing a mother-daughter.
Oh, wow.
And the invasion happened while we were in the Arctic, actually. And I looked at her and I was like, what are you seeing here? And she said, I cannot believe that that this is happening when it feels so, she said, it feels so like old school, like, wait a minute, we've already bought that T-shirt. It didn't work. Well, really? And so, but you see, we clearly need, to me, because I look at life sort of from a slightly like from the universe perspective. So when stuff like this happens, I'm like, okay, why are we needing to have that in our face again? What's going on here? This isn't coincidence. So now we're having a rerun of a literal invasion. We have got war. I mean, it's like here
right there.
To me. Yeah. And I'm thinking, okay, so we clearly need to have another look at how this feels and whether we are accepting and cool with that. How does it look like it's a solution? Does that look like a behavior that is going to solve the current issues and problems that are facing us collectively in the world today? And the answer is glaringly no. And I felt like COVID kind of was the same. It was an opportunity for everyone. It was the first time I felt that the entire planet was affected by the same thing, and no one could just say, sorry, not my problem, so I'll just let that one be dealt with. It was everyone's problem. And there was an opportunity in that. It was like the universe was saying, come on now, wake up, everybody. And so I agree with you. It has a sense of magic around it. And I prefer to look at it that way, because if you don't look at it that way, you will just be terrified and afraid and depressed and think everything is going to hell. But I think there's an opportunity. I think it's the opposite.
Well, I mean, I say so. I love what you just said, by the way. I had the same reaction. I remember sitting here watching the news and I was like, oh my God, read the room planetary, like globally.
Yeah,
What do you know? I mean, it was so, but nonetheless, that's the old patriarchy, authoritative male, right?
exactly.
We just got done with having that leadership in the States. And now, I won't go into that. Let me just take a breath after that.
Oh, we've had some good times here in the UK.
I know.
Don't get me started on that either. So
I've been there. I've been there like for the Jubilee and then the death. I was there like the funeral, like, and now I'm going to be there for the coronation. I leave in 2 weeks. So, yeah, I've been there for really pivotal times lately. And I was there for the head turning prime minister rotating door. So, yeah, I mean, but one of the things that came out of the Ukraine that I was listening to, there was a meeting with, is it Norway or Finland that has the female prime minister? So she just did a meeting with the German, there's a German head of something high up in the government. It's obviously Merkel isn't there anymore and it's not who replaced Merkel, but there was a meeting that they had and they were talking about how Europe has responded with renewable energy sources as a way to get around being reliant on the Russian oil. And that's one kick-ass outcome of, I mean, it just, and then the world getting to see the Ukrainian spirit. Yeah, it's always one of the things in response directly to what you just said. One of the things I say the most is, man, the mind typically interprets things almost the exact opposite of what the universe or the soul level interpretation is. So when it looks one way, take that mountaintop perspective or that satellite perspective, because it's really the other way, particularly in these times now. So yeah, in the Chinese character for crisis contains opportunity within it, or the Chinese character for chaos contains crisis and opportunity. Those two characters come together to create the word chaos, crisis, opportunity. So yeah, I mean, but it's not just us creating it. It's like, if you look at the stars, I go into this in my third book, Reasonable Dragons, quite a lot. It's on Audible, so I'm looking over at it. You guys can't see because this is audio only. But anyway, the NASA has been, we had a full moon on the Wall Street Journal's cover in the last couple of years. I mean, for the Wall Street Journal, right, balancing the material and the spiritual, to have the full moon on its cover. And then if you look at NASA, like in 2014 or 16, I don't remember, there was an alignment that happened in the stars that hadn't happened since Jesus was born, the stars of Bethlehem. There's an alignment where now currently, and we just moved into the 23rd of April, that is, pardon me, what are we in right now? We're in April. It's 23rd of March. That is, hasn't been around since 1776 when we had the French and American revolutions. There have been, looking at NASA.com, there's a history line that you can look at to see, like, we have had some massive constellations or alignment of different planets and stars that has only happened when there's been something massive historically, but we've had them one after another. And so right now we're moving into, at the end of April, we're going to have the second lunation. As we're recording this, it's a full moon tomorrow night, but the second lunation, the new moon, is with a full solar eclipse. And then the first full moon in May is another eclipse. It's a lunar eclipse. So we get eclipse seasons every May and every October, which ironically is when I'm in the UK leading these retreats and trainings. And so the eclipse time is great for endings and completions. And really what we're at right now is each of us wants to be eclipsing or completing like those patterns where we're in our status quo and our ego mind is the most comfortable. And challenging ourselves. I mean, we're being given cosmic alignments, and I don't mean to use such a, 70s groovy word, cosmic, but what I'm trying to say is the influences, our vibrational backdrop we are living in ensuingly from the different stars and planets alignments is very much to induce us to come out of where we've gotten lulled into status quo or comfort zones and into choosing and creating the new. So being bold with ourselves, making a new choice, like one every day, even if it's just driving a different route to work, to increase the flexibility to being open to the new and come out of that robotic mode. We need each of us making new choices so that we can break open more of the possibilities for us to create an earth that's sustainable, a lifestyle that's sustainable, and where we're tapped into, instead of the suffering that the ego mind tends to have such a field day focusing on, and instead the possibilities, like if we're coming more from an opened heart and more from a soul level, where we're looking at the wisdom within us, the other aspects of our mind, body, spirit system that we're given. It's not just the mind. It's the mind, body, spirit, from the holistic approach. If you're looking at maximizing and optimizing your home or your car, I look at that with our own system, the mind, body, spirit system. This is about optimizing us and then the planet benefiting from that.
Well, I really like that sentiment there about how, because I was going to ask you, what is it that you would say to people and what they can do? And you've just said it there. We can engage by making some new choices and by shifting our own energies a little bit. That is perfectly in the power and in the realm for each of us as individuals to kind of unstick ourselves in whatever stuck place that we have got to. And that can be spiritual, mentally, physically, whatever. And like you said, even driving to work in a different way, just to sort of rejig ourselves and have a new experience rather than just go on repeat all the time. And not letting the energy, as it were, creative and otherwise, flow. And that is so important. So I think that's a really positive, empowering message, actually, to leave people with, because like I said, if you looked at the news a little too much, if you look too much at the what isn't working and the lacking, then you can easily just stay there and feel like, well, what's the point of me making any effort at all? Because, well, that's wrong. We can actually contribute, all of us, into the collective. And we do anyway, because by doing nothing, you are contributing to the nothingness and to that low energy. So, you might as well shift it and contribute in a more positive way. And I just want to say to any listener who's thinking, oh gosh, this has been two yoga teachers talking about energy, and and I said, well, if you need any scientific support for all this energy chat, Albert Einstein himself, actually, he said that everything in life is vibration. So, if it's good enough for Einstein, it's good enough for me, I think.
Can I tell you, Einstein, I go through this in one of my books. He ran from when they came up with the study where they finally saw in this controlled laboratory setting, they were influencing the outcome and they could not study objectively an outcome, which basically brought in quantum physics, that we are connected in the proof of energy becomes matter based on what we're focusing on. It took the orthodox halls of science 100 years to deal with that. Einstein was one of them that piloted away from that because it just implied way too much. And he went back to his grand theory of everything, the gut theory. It's huge. And we don't, and even relying on science to prove what is observable.
Well, I love it when science catches up with ancient wisdom.
I know. Me too, because then it helps other people. And it does give a certain form of validity. And that's okay. I mean, it seems like we've relied on science as originally intended to explain our material world, right? I just want to leave, before we go, I don't want to go down that hole because I know we're getting ready to wrap up, but there's like ways, if you took a different way to drive to work, then that means you're creating more flexibility in your neurology. So one of the other ways to do that is when you find yourself actually able to have enough detachment, which is a skill learned from meditation. I'm not suggesting you meditate, But if you have enough spaciousness to see a thought as you're about to make a choice, or your mind is whining about how bad something is, you could talk back to it. It's a technique used in the West's cognitive behavioral psychology, as well as in Tibetan Buddhism in particular. There's more classrooms in monasteries than there are rooms to meditate in. I was shocked when I found that out. So talk back to the mind, and you could ask it, well, is that really even true? And then you could even go further with the redirect now and say, what if there's nothing wrong here? And then you could even add into it questions which open up an invitation for the universe to come in. How does it get any better than this? What else is possible? Both of which come from access consciousness. But there's ways that are simple to work with your mind at every level. Like, do I need to take the garbage out? Does this need to go in the garbage? Do I need to buy it this way in this packaging? Like every single, the unity is becoming a thing for us, like I talked about, because we're becoming more connected and recognizing our interconnection, which means if I am more joyous, I'm helping now 100,000 other hearts become more joyous. It used to be 10,000. But because everything is more compounded and exponential in this vibrational backdrop, as it's apparently helping us move into the new, we're not only more connected, we're also more responsible.
Yeah, no, we're all in it together, are we not?
Absolutely.
And what I love is that all the knowledge is there, thousands of years of wisdom. We don't have to invent anything. We don't need to like come up with the new idea. We all know it's there already. We just need to change our behaviors and apply it. And
just one small thing at a time too.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be vast or big. Yeah, the mind likes to go there like, no, just one small thing.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you know what, Dr. Allison, we could have gone on for a longer. I'm sure there's just so much, and I just love talking about this. I feel it's energizing, it's helpful, and it's fun. It's fun, and yeah, let's all just throw ourselves out there together and shift stuff, and I think it's all good. So thank you for your time, and yeah, let's come back onto the mat another time and have another chat and check in.